As a part-time club DJ, I like a party as much as the next person, but not in a lockdown. And I think this is the problem that the Prime Minister's got. It's one of credibility and trust with the British public. And a bit like in 1992 after Black Wednesday, John Major could never really recover. And Theresa May, after that disastrous election in 2017, also could never recover. I think Boris Johnson is definitely in the last chance saloon. And if his MPs don't kill him off now, I can't really see him going to the next election. I may be wrong. Maybe he turns it round, but I think he's on a very sticky wicket. I mean, just on some of these policies that you were talking about, Michelle, this is really the classic Linton Crosby dead cat strategy. Linton Crosby being Boris Johnson's election strategist, won him 2 mayoral elections in London. And the dead cat strategy is, if there's an issue that's causing you severe difficulties, and at the moment parties are the issue, put a dead cat on the table so everyone starts talking about that and not about the issue that's causing you all the grief. Hence, he's talking about today about the Navy patrolling the Channel to try and deal with this migrant issue where we've had about 30,000 people crossing the Channel in the last year, also now freezing the licence fee. But what about the cost of living crisis? What about the fact that as of April, national insurance is going up, inflation's going up, energy bills are rising? That's the thing that's really on people's minds. Not a peep out of the Prime Minister on that. I think this is all distraction tactics, and I think Tory MPs, after the weekend they've had, will be pondering how long this can go on for.
Ella? I think that it's really quite insulting because what the government seems to be doing is treating voters like dogs. You know, you wave a ball. I mean, you talk about the cat strategy. You wave a ball around and throw it, and we're meant to follow the ball. It's incredibly insulting. It's also reflective of how I think the government, and particularly Boris Johnson, thinks about how we view the parties. Because you're right, Michelle, everyone's sick of talking about parties. Lots of people, I think, watching this all play out over the last few weeks will have thought, well, you're working in a building, you go into the garden, you know, who's died, what's the big deal? The problem is the focus has been on whether or, you know, and this impending investigation from Sue Gray is going to be whether or not someone was or wasn't inside the garden door, whether they were holding a bottle of wine in their hand, all the specifics. When the real issue is, was the government right to implement such restrictions as allowing the police to arrest people or who were sitting alone on benches, preventing people from meeting up outside? You know, were the general sense of what happened in lockdown, you know, particularly the first one, but then in successive ones, necessary, right, fair, you know, socially healthy? And I think by just getting let off the hook in relation to this one particular party, deflecting it by sending out the Navy to chase a few migrants in a dinghy, which, by the way, I think is pretty disgusting, is, you know, I think it completely ignores the real thing that we have to be talking about, which is, should this government be held to account for its actions, many of them undemocratic, many of them passed without parliamentary scrutiny over the last 2 years. I don't care who's had a drink with who in the garden of Downing Street. I care about the policies that Downing Street and the Prime Minister and his cabinet members passed over the last 2 years.
Yeah, Emma, I mein, Ella, God, my panel today, Emma, Ella, Ali, it sounds like I'm about to burst into a rap song, but I'm not. Emma, Ella there talks about, you know, following, you know, around and being like a dog, etc. But actually, I don't find this insulting. I find this a sensible manoeuvre by the government to actually move on with life, because at the end of the day, I personally am someone that was very frightened of COVID in this first lockdown. I was terrified of it. I was pregnant. I was terrified. I was livid with everyone and anyone that broke rules. But then I learnt a little bit more about COVID. Life moved on a little bit, and I have just moved on a little bit. So for me, seeing you know, talk about policies was music to my ears. And I also don't blame the government for actually wanting to get a hold of things, as opposed to just being letting the news agenda be manipulated by people with, quite frankly, an alternate agenda. They're not people that care about the health and safety of the public. They're doing it to bring down a Prime Minister that they don't like. You're frowning at me. That's not a problem. You're allowed to disagree. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, I think I have a number of thoughts. First of all, I don't think it's true that this is some sinister forces trying to manipulate the public into caring about things that they don't. I think there was a lot of scepticism from the media that the public would care. And this crisis blew up for the government because they really, really did.
But you must concede that the way that this has been leaked, the frequencies in which it's been leaked, the drip, the drip, the drip, the drip, That is carefully curated.
Oh, absolutely. And whoever's doing it, and I can't imagine who it might be, clearly knows a thing or two about media manipulation. But they've got a lot to work with. And if the government didn't want to be run by a psychodrama, they probably shouldn't have allowed so many psychos to be involved. I think what actually matters, the red meat here, is not for the public. Who it's for is the small group of backbenchers, Tory backbenchers, who Boris Johnson is worried are going to take his job away. And you don't just make policy up on the hoof, just like that, just because to try and please a few people. And also, by the way, he is not the first
which one
Tory
do you think
Prime
is just
Minister.
made up?
Well, I mean, I think the idea that the Navy can do something the RNLI can't in the world's busiest shipping lane is actually a bit weird. I think the idea, and just randomly...
Of course the Navy can achieve something that the RNLI... That's a bizarre point. If you look at things like...
what, they're going to do, shoot him?
If you look at things like in Australia, where they had a concept called Operation Sovereign Borders, which was very led by the military, many, yes, I understand it's got some controversial aspects to it, but many would argue that that was successful. So I don't understand the contrast that's saying, well,
Because
what can the RNLI do that the Navy can't?
Because what Australia have done, amongst other things, is offshore immigration, which has nothing to do with sending Navy boats out. What Navy boats out do is give you a good picture on the 6 o'clock news, and that's all he's after.
Right, so what else do you think they've made up on the hoof?
Well, this whole attacking the BBC, again, it's about what plays best in the 1922 committee.
That's been talked about for years.
They've been talking about something. They're announcing it now with very little ground laying, very little understanding of what it actually means. Nadine Dorries has stood up and said, we're going to do something. Everyone says, what? She says, dunno. You know, that's not the way to do policy.
Now they've come up with a plan.
Yeah, the thing is about, in particular, in relation to the immigration thing, Emma's right. Just sending out a few boats as a kind of, I think, semi-publicity stunt isn't going to do anything in relation to what we know is a very complex picture about immigration. I care very much about the sovereignty of our borders. I also care very much about the fact that because of the West's actions in places like Afghanistan, there are an insubordinate amount of people trying to, people who are in desperate situations trying to find a better life for themselves. That's not going to be fixed by, as you called it, back of a fag box policy that's been created in order to
But we do have an immediate thing that we need to stop people risking their own lives.
Yes, and we should have a... Sorry, Ali, but we should have... This should be part of a wider public debate. We have never had... You often talk on this programme about the importance of democracy. We have never had an open, public, informed discussion about immigration in this country. We didn't have it in relation to Brexit. We didn't have it post-Brexit. And yet we have boats flying around. One of the policies that you announced was the removal of coronavirus restrictions and Plan B. If the government's serious about changing its tack on coronavirus, it won't just remove Plan B. It will remove all restrictions, including things like people in care homes, residents who are still being refused access to their families. There's a whole load of stuff that the government has to review, and you can't just tick box it away.
Ali Mirage?
Well, to be fair to Boris, frankly, he's been shooting himself in the foot multiple times over recent months. A lot of unforced errors, from Owen Patterson's sleaze debacle to who paid for his wallpaper and who didn't. But look, on the substance of the issue about the Navy patrolling the Channel, this is the latest in a long line of tactics that have been tried by the Home Secretary, including trying to offshore some of these asylum seekers and migrants to Ascension Island. That never happened. Now they're talking about Ghana and Rwanda. They also had this policy of trying to look at these big vessels to try and create large waves to try and push these boats back, which by all accounts could have actually resulted in capsizing of these boats and people's deaths. So we're going to have to see how this plays out. But the reality is that optically it's been looking very bad for the government, that on Get Brexit Done, one of the key issues was controlling the borders, and they've patently failed to do it. We've given 54 million to the French. It hasn't made any difference.
Ali, there'll be people watching this, shouting at their tellies, going, well, the government cannot win. They cannot win. They do nothing. They get criticised for doing nothing. They try and do something. They get criticised for trying to do something.
The wrong thing.
They then
There's a difference between something must be done and doing anything.
I mean, they've got a thing of creative solutions, trying to deploy the Navy.
They can't buy every dinghy in France.
But you can come over on a ferry. You can come over on a plane. If you want to have an asylum system, I've said this a million times on this programme, actually, if you want to have an asylum system that works, you decide the rules and then you make sure it's safe and fairly accessible.
But
the moment we're playing this double game where the government and And, and people living in Britain like to say that they love refugees and it's all nice and come over and we're so great. And then there's, at the same time, discussions about wave machines, a really barbaric thing. So the two don't add
One other
up.
thing, Ella, just on the BBC point, by the way. I think the BBC and the future of the BBC is a hugely important debate that the public needs to have, right? We need to have a debate in this country about what we expect from a public service broadcaster, what that looks like in an era of Netflix and Amazon Prime and other streaming services. What role does a public broadcaster play? And how does a public broadcaster avoid the appearance of any sort of bias, which is a very difficult thing to do. And the BBC's come in criticism a lot of times for things like the proms, and we laugh at all these things, but they're serious and they matter to a lot of people. And Tim Davie, the new Director General, seems to have his head screwed on quite properly, understands that there's going to be a licence fee discussion coming down the track. He's also got a new chairman who's Rishi Sunak's ex-boss. So they understand it. So we need to have a public debate. We can't just do this on the hoof. Apparently by 2027, the licence fee is going to be abolished, but we haven't had any discussion about it.
Absolutely.